Now, let's get to your next article. This is where you came out with the process of understanding how every player is getting paid in this portal. You got quarterbacks ranging from 500,000 to 800,000, running backs from 200 to 300,000, wide receivers 75,000 to 300, offensive linemen 350 to 500,000, D linemen 250 to 600, linebackers going from 100,000 to 300K, and the position of need that we all understand are DBs 120 to 225. Now, when I was at the general manager position at the University of Maryland, I wish you would have came out with this just so you can give us just a template of knowing what we should be negotiating with, or the numbers that we should be negotiating with. But as right now, how did you come up with the process of getting all this pertinent information that nobody else could gather?
Yeah, it's tough, and this is an exact science. And, it's funny, I've heard, from some people after the fact, like, you should have been higher on that range, or you should have been a little lower on that one. So it's not perfect, but, try to talk to as many people as possible. So, we talk to people who run collectives, we talk to coaches, we talk to agents, we talk to player personnel people, players themselves, player parents. You're trying to just collect as much data as possible and try to find a range that makes sense. I think one of the things that we learned too, we focused on Power 4, and there's, as you guys know, there's a lot of differences in between that. So, some of this data is skewed a little bit, based on certain conferences wanting to spend more than others. The SEC is probably the most bullish, most aggressive in how they spend. The Big 12, there are some schools that are probably not spending at these ranges typically. And that's just kind of part of the balance of trying to look at, the Power 4 as a whole. But, all you can do is just talk to as many smart people that you trust as possible and try to, go with that. And so I don't think the numbers are egregious. Maybe Coach Reed's going to dunk on me here for some of my numbers being bad. But, for the most part, just tried to get as accurate a range as possible, understanding that there's no centralized data anywhere, and it's all a little bit of an inexact science.
Well, John, I don't know if I'm going to dunk on you. When you're talking about NIL money, I got my guy Smoke Dixon here, who played at Alabama, came out of high school in '99, and the rumors around Tuscaloosa and throughout the state of Alabama that was actually kind of low on DBs, because he had to be given much more than 225 to go to Alabama back there in 1999. So from an NIL standpoint, inflation, you would think the numbers would be a little higher than this. But
Smoke was worth it for sure. Let's start there. He was worth that and more, I'm sure.
John, why does there
every penny?
Why does there seem to be such a disconnect between the numbers that you have in your research and what the media puts out there and what players feel like they should get? When you think about the numbers you put up, quarterback range $500,000 to $800,000, how do we get to 13 million with Jaden Rashada being reported? How do we get to 8 million with Nico that went to the University of Tennessee to play quarterback? Guys seem like they expect so much more money than these numbers that you're reporting here.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things there. I think one, and we do mention this in the story, that there are some outliers, right? So if you look at this past, last year or so transfer portal cycle, guys like Cam Ward, Riley Leonard, they were outside of that range, from what I've been told. So there are still guys that are going to be higher than these general ranges. But, I think what makes this so hard, and I'm not trying to blame anybody for this, but again, there's really no way of proving so much of this, right? So, you can claim kind of whatever you want, whether it's higher or lower than what the actual number is. And it's very hard to prove it one way or another. So I do think that, agents like to, kind of juice up what their alleged numbers are. It makes them look better, makes their players look better. I've definitely talked to some kids who said, yeah, I have this offer for $500,000 from this school. I check in at that school and they're like, we're offering him $75,000. So, people are going to lie a little bit to kind of make themselves look better. Collectives, I think the thing that's interesting about collectives is that they don't always necessarily want their data out there, right? Especially ones who feel like they've found an edge. Maybe they've found a market that's inefficient right now where they're getting good value. They were a bit skittish, some of the ones that I talked to and some of the personnel people I talked to, about giving their data, especially if they feel like they kind of have an edge on other people. So they're like, we don't really necessarily want to tell you exactly what we're spending here because we don't want, like Smoke mentioned, how valuable it would have been. we don't want Maryland seeing what we're spending on linebackers, knowing that we're getting better value than what other people are getting. So that's part of the challenge, I think, with it too. But, there's definitely people who are throwing out big numbers that do not exist. And unfortunately, I do think that has a negative impact on players who might say, I see this running back's getting $1 million. I'm better than that guy. I should go in the portal and see how much I get. And then they get into the portal, and that value is nowhere near that. And then they get stuck. And so you're starting to see some of those stories pop up more often. And I think that's really sad.
John, my man Carl, he's been at me all day talking about where are the tight ends on this list.
Yeah, that's on me. That was, I guess I'll throw my editor under the bus too. We forgot that one. So, I did talk to some people after the fact, trying to get a little bit of a range. It's interesting is that I just don't know that I have the concrete feel really good about those numbers yet to put it out there, but we'll work on a follow-up to try to get all the tight ends out there, the correct number. But you guys, listen, you guys are two of the most plugged in people in the game. You guys can probably tell your audience what the tight end range is better than I could at this point.
Hey, you're not gonna put me on the spot on here. Bringing the money up on what they get paid, but the tight ends are blowing me up, saying, "Coach, John got to get my money right now. He left me off the list. I'm trying to get paid."
Well, send them my way. We'll work on getting a good number out there.
What position group surprised you in terms of their market value?
I think for me, it's the ones where I felt like you could get value in. Again, everybody's different, and there's going to be some guys that are higher than what we have. But I thought both at wide receiver and at defensive back that there was some value to be had there on the lower end of the range. And so if you can get, and again, there's some they're going to have to pay more, but if you could get a starting wide receiver that can play at power 4 level and have an impact, at 100,000 or in that range, and I think that's great value. Now, again, I think it got harder to get those guys, especially in the spring cycle. There's scarcity, I think, and so you're seeing guys who maybe are not at the high end getting a good bit more than that. Sometimes, timing is everything. I think in the winter, there's so many more guys hitting that sometimes you can get a better deal. Whereas on the flip side, you look at this past spring cycle and just some of the numbers that I was told for the defensive tackle position kind of blew my mind, but there were so few of them available that you felt like you could really plug and play, that the scarcity there really drove up the value. And so if you maybe got a defensive tackle who could play in the winter, you might have gotten a much better value deal than if you had to go shopping this past spring.
Well, John, we want to thank you for coming on and joining us and giving us that information. Where can people find your list and your article? Where can people follow you on social media?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at JTalty. And both of those stories were at CBS Sports. I shared them on Twitter. I'm sure we can get them, shared out again. But, loved being on with you guys. I love the show. You guys have been doing some great interviews. I don't think I rise up to that level of guests you guys have had recently, but appreciate you having me on, and would love to be on again in the future.
John, thank you. Smoke, when I think of the Billy Napier, the Florida situation with Jada Rashada, one of the things that comes to my mind is I feel like Billy Napier, the NCAA failed him. And I think two things can be true. I think that Jaden Rashada was promised something that he wasn't given, and that's why they're filing a lawsuit and why him and his family is upset. But I also thought the NCAA failed Billy Napier, and not just Billy Napier, they failed a bunch of college coaches, and this is why. Head college coaches should not be negotiating or should not be a part of having conversations about what kids are going to get paid from an NIL perspective. They shouldn't be in those meetings. They shouldn't be a part of that. College football has to structure itself very similar to the NFL with the front office and the function of the general manager, the function of the guys under him in the front office. They need to have another entity that's dealing with the money. College coaches are not qualified to have money discussions with players, which is why they all have agents themselves. They don't negotiate their own contracts. So if you don't feel comfortable negotiating your money in your own contract and you have to have an agent, you shouldn't be the person that's handling the money. If you think about the National Football League, the head coach is not the person who's negotiating with the agent for the player. Smoke, do you know who else shouldn't be negotiating money for the player? His dad, his high school coach, his cousin, his trainer, his 7-on-7 guy. There's so much legality to these financial situations that guys have got to position themselves to make sound decisions. What I feel bad for Billy Napier is this. We will never get to see if Billy Napier was going to be the next great ball coach because he's been failed by his collective on occasion after occasion. One of the collectives is completely defunct now. We're not going to get to see if Billy really could have went to one of the most dominant programs of the last 20 or 30 years and turned it into a powerhouse program. He has not failed as a coach. He has not failed as a recruiter. He's been put in situations where he has had to come up or be a voice of reason with money from a collective in a system that's failing a lot of people. So I think Billy got a raw deal. I also think that Jaden got a raw deal though as well. And so I think that the NCAA has to look at this smoke and kind of figure out a way to put this in a better situation.
Carl, I couldn't have said it any better than that. I think you touched on all cases. When I was ever in position as the general manager at University of Maryland, I did contracts in the XFL, I did contracts in the NFL. The one thing that I always wanted to move was the emotions. And I always wanted to keep the most important people in line with what was going on, and that was at the agent. And the agent's job is always separating the emotions from the actual numbers. We saw a couple of years ago when Lamar Jackson had to negotiate his contract, and his mother was his representative. That contract situation led all the way out to the point that he almost left the Baltimore Ravens organization. And the reason for that was his mother was doing it. And as a mother or someone that's connected to the situation emotionally, you're never going to see the financial part that the business of the Baltimore Ravens is always looking out for, because they have to now get 53 on the contract and make sure that that quarterback contract, Lamar Jackson contract, was being done that at the right financial place. So my opinion and what I would suggest to each player going into a situation in terms of NIL, make sure that you get proper representation. Anything that you do, you want it to be documented. So when it's documented, you can always come back and say, these are the terms that we negotiated, and I'm going to hold you firm to those. And if we're not, we're going to get up from this business table and move on. Last thing, negotiate that deal before you get on campus for that official visit. Official visit can be highly emotional. You don't want to make an emotional decision when it's 100% business when you get to the point of getting paid for play.
Documentation beats conversation.
1,000%.